Um, so thank you for this journey. I think the best way to proceed is that if people who have actually written their anima mean statements would care to share them with the rest of the class, that can kick off our discussion. So who would like to go first?
I'll go.
Okay, Linda, thanks.
I'll go. Okay. It's a lot. Okay, here it goes. First, I feel gratitude that I am a Jew. The fact that we are able to discuss all of the topics that we did with open minds and open hearts makes me especially proud to be a conservative Jew. I know that halakha specifies many things we are expected to follow. I don't purport to follow them all. However, when I do follow halakha, it reminds me of my Jewishness. And even when I don't, it does as well as I stop and consciously consider what I am doing. What I feel with regards to the nature of God and theodicy comes partially from a spiritual place. First, I do not believe God controls what we do or what others do or what happens to us. I do not feel we can blame God for what happens to us individually or to us as Jews or to all of humanity. Nor can we blame God for natural disasters or crops being wiped out. I do believe that something greater than ourselves, God, put the world in motion, and it is now up to all of us to determine what happens. Belief in God is necessary for us to strive to be the good people we are meant to be. There needs to be something bigger than ourselves that we can turn to in times of joy and times of distress. I feel that God is there to protect me and my loved ones, whether it be to keep us from harm or to help us cope with tragedy. I believe that each of us contains a part of God within us that allows for this faith. We have a part of God within each one of us, and we all together make up God. When we studied the Shema, I remember you saying it did not end with God is one, but with God alone. This was a very important distinction to me. God is one meant to me that we believe in one God and not multiple gods, like the God of the sun or the God of idols or Jesus. God alone means to me that God is all there is. God is in all of us. God is in nature. God is in what happens through us. We also discussed that God will close the heavens and hold back the rain. It does not mean that God is a wrathful that gets back at us for not believing in him or her, God. It instead points to the fact that we can cause all of the bad things to happen to our crops and lives by not taking care of our earth and by not treating others as if they too are a part of God. God is there when we live good lives, treating ourselves and others with respect and caring. God is there when we take care of animals and the environment. Why do bad things happen to good people? That is hard to understand when, for instance, a child dies. Why? In such instances, I feel that God is there inside of all of us to help us find the courage and strength to get through it all and survive. The God in others helps them to support us and show compassion and empathy for us to also help us get through our pain. I feel this view of God can also help explain something as terrible as the Holocaust. God did not make or allow this to happen. There are people that do not identify with the part of God within them. Hitler did not have God as his guide. He was not acting through the part of God within. Those that followed him were not following the God within either. When we all live with the open minds and hearts that is God, these kinds of things cannot happen. We will then not be influenced by bad intentions and hatred. Our open minds and hearts will lead us to fulfill God's plan for the good in the world. I feel this view of God answers our questions of the acceptance of women and LGBTQ as well. If we are all part of a God, how is any one of us better or more correct than any other? There is no other. We are all one. I believe that revelation was not God in one instance handing us laws by which to live. I believe that the 40 years of wandering with all kinds of people with different views of life and God gave the Jews the time to find God within each one of themselves. It was time to understand what was good versus bad in behavior and beliefs. What helped them all? What caused distress and hurt? What were laws to abide by? Believing in something larger than themselves, but within themselves and others as well, taught them what was required to make a new nation. What were good and bad intentions of others within the group and those they met along the way? These lessons learned were written down and they are our story. Thank you for the wonderful class.
Thank you.
Good.
That was great.
Beautiful.
Great.
Those are long paragraphs, I got to tell you.
Yeah, yeah.
Filled out.
That was very thorough.
Yeah.
That was very thorough. Anybody who would like to go next?
I'll go.
Okay, thanks.
All right. This is going to be much shorter, Linda, so I'm going to ask you to just help me out. This class has helped me organize some of my thoughts. There is a supreme being that is beyond our comprehension, but by studying the Torah, the Talmud, and other sources, we can understand more about this being. It is a lifelong quest. We learn to help others, take care of our family, our friends, and the community. We learn that there is a great power in prayer, both individually and together, and that there is strength in organizing for a cause. Often we do not appreciate why things happen to us, but we are aware that there's a need to go on. As Marcus Aurelius said, misfortune nobly borne is good fortune. A relationship with the Supreme Being is available to us, but a description is difficult as reducing that to words diminishes it. Each of us experiences such a relationship. While Judaism developed a different set of values regarding men and women, now conservative Jews understand that there is equality of the sexes and everyone deserves respect and a chance to participate in our service. The concept of halakha and the source of religious authority is based on the Torah and the Talmud. Ultimately, it is interpreted by rabbinical scholars. Halakha changes and evolves as time goes on. It provides a framework for appropriate action. I identify as an American citizen who is Jewish. While I believe that conservative Judaism is an approach to worship, ethics, and morals, I believe that there is value in studying other religions and philosophies. The topics studied in our classes are complicated and cannot adequately be summarized in a couple of paragraphs. I didn't realize what Linda was going to do. But this has been a valuable exercise for me. Thank you.
Good job.
Very nice. Next.
Thank you.
Next.
You can do it.
I guess I can go next.
Okay, great.
Okay. As a child, my vision of God was of an overwhelming man who was all powerful. I grew up with many Italian Catholic friends who had photos of Jesus and crosses on their walls. I watched Charlton Heston and the Ten Commandments. I learned biblical stories and studied for my bat mitzvah and confirmation. I did not question prayer. I just learned the prayers. While many years have passed since then, and I have had my own thoughts and perceptions of God, this class has provided a lot of food for thought. I have often pondered the nature of God, asking the question Harold Kushner asked, why do bad things happen to good people? However, I never questioned the existence of God. Perhaps at times I never questioned God's existence because, like Job at first, my life has been very blessed. I also did not question God's existence because there are miracles and silver linings every day, despite sadness, injustice, and tragedy. However, when I do think about the Holocaust and other horrific times in history, and when good individuals suffer great tragedies, my faith is tested. Is God omnipotent, benevolent, and omniscient? I want to believe this because for most of my life, I have been guided by God's spiritual presence to get me through difficult times. And in my moments of helplessness, I have found solace in prayer and the mindset that many things are just out of my control and in God's hands. Does that mean I should do nothing? Absolutely not. I must not let this feeling of powerlessness overwhelm me, but realize that not everything works out as planned or for a reason. I believe we are the chosen people. I really felt that when we visited Israel 2 years ago, and I tried to absorb the history, diversity, ideologies, the challenges, and the beauty of the country. I believe the Torah comes from God, a supreme being, and we must continuously interpret it in order to lead a meaningful life. Halacha provides a framework for us, but I don't dwell on halacha. I prefer to incorporate my own interpretations of what I'm comfortable with. Thank you, Rabbi, for your knowledge and insight to help me understand many theological concepts and put them in the context of the world we live today.
Thank you. Okay, Sue, would you like to read yours?
Oh, I guess I'll have to at some point.
Well, unless I missed an email somewhere, you are the last one who actually sent me something in writing. So.
Oh, okay. I will say though, after I re-looked at it again, I feel like, you know, some of the things I would like to, it sounds like I'm very strict in my thoughts and not very flexible, and I didn't mean it to be that way. But in any case, I guess I can't have 10 pages, so. Anyway, I believe that God is an all-powerful spirit or being that is far beyond our comprehension. Although I don't believe that God is male or female, I don't have a problem saying Lord or King in a prayer. I believe God responds to our prayers, but not always in the way we want or understand or like. It is interesting to me that people assume God is dead or has left us alone or can't be all powerful and all good at the same time because of bad things happen. If we had the mind of God, we would understand why tragedy, natural disasters, or evil occurs. To say God cannot be all good and all powerful at the same time and have evil is not accepting a God who is beyond human understanding. We seem to want a God who fits into our human intellect. I believe God is involved in our lives. In the Torah, it says God loves the people of Israel. Loving implies an active relationship, which would not be possible if God is no longer active in human lives or history. I also believe that the 10 Commandments were given at Sinai. In my opinion, something profound happened there that continues to be a pivotal event in our history. But I think the rest of the Torah was revealed by God to prophets and other inspired people in our scriptures. Lastly, my connection to the Jewish people, our ancestors and ancient past, is very important to me. For this reason, traditional prayers, liturgy and rituals are extremely important. When I say these prayers or participate in a traditional liturgy, I feel connected to my ancient past, which gives me a sense of happiness and pride. I believe all Jews are a part of a very ancient and special heritage. When we eliminate, in quote, old-fashioned prayers, practices, or ceremonies that some people feel are no longer relevant, for example, keeping kosher or changing traditional prayers and observances as in Reform practice, we take away what makes Jews and Judaism distinctive and connected to our past. We want peace and equality for all people, but that does not mean we need to eliminate what makes Judaism different. We should only change things that are necessary to make all Jews feel part of our community. If there's a practice that I feel is challenging to keep, like kosher, I would rather strive to do better at keeping kosher than have it eliminated as not relevant. And I'd also like to thank the rabbi.
Thank you.
All right, so can I talk without writing?
You may,
Don't you
absolutely.
usually?
Yeah, usually I talk without thinking, but okay. So my thoughts are maybe more basic and maybe a bit more complicated. I have a really firm belief in God, and it's a one-on-one belief, at least on my side, and it's very close and intense, at least on my side. And I don't care about the other side. I am a realist. There are a lot of people in this world, and I got to share my friend, and that's cool. Starting with that, I'm a Jew, which gives me a framework within which to deal with my friend. And right now, that's through Kehilat Shalom and Rabbi Arian and the conservative movement. I do what I do in remarkable ignorance, both of what that means, conservative Judaism, and what the implications are of other choices. And I find, frankly, that we all suffer from basically the same disadvantage of speaking of halakha without knowing it. And we are supposed to follow halakha, but we don't know it. And the religion provides for that, as I understand it, because we're never considered sinful if we didn't know we were violating halakha. Really. And so ignorance is an excuse in Judaism, within bounds. These past couple of months, while we took this class, the world around us exploded in lots of different directions. And suddenly, not only in the class, push was coming to shove, which made us have to think a bit more than normal because life was not as normal. So I was, as much as I really liked the topics of each class, I was really taken by the way the conservative movement dealt with the world in which we find ourselves. Because if I'm going to say I'm a conservative Jew, then I need to serve it, and it needs to serve me, and it's got to be that way. And I thought the conservative movement did brilliantly. Before I get out of power, I thought the conservative movement did brilliantly in that responsum that allowed us to use Zoom, for example. Okay, I don't think of halakha. It's because I'm dumb and ignorant. I don't think of halakha as my guideline. I don't know it well enough. I don't know the ins and outs and the workarounds and the choices that are behind what I'm being told. But I rely on halakha for Saturday morning services to give us the ritual framework within which we can express our Judaism on a routine basis. The way that the religion is there for us, God forbid you really need it in moments of extreme trial, and there's the layout, and it's all late. I mean, it's there, probably among the best of on the planet. And I admire and respect and appreciate all of that. But to me, there's still a gap between what halakha says and what I think God needs and wants. If you think God needs and wants anything, which is another question. Certainly as to how I should behave, once I have that close relationship with God, do I really need the middleman of halakha to point me in minutiae on my journey to be closer to God? To me, that's a really important question that I keep bothering the rabbi. It's obvious from all the questions I asked the rabbi, but it's really like in the top 10 of my head whenever the opportunity comes up, because it's a really important question, because I see them as totally different. The one thing is the belief in God. After that, believing in the Torah's precepts as ignorant people understand them, so that we don't go killing people and robbing people and acting wrongly, the difference to know right and wrong, the distinction between good and bad as laid out for us in the Torah, and for that matter, as provided for us in halakha in global terms. But you know, I once asked the rabbi, do you really think God cares whether we wait 1 hour or 2 hours after meat before eating milk? The rabbi didn't hesitate for a moment. He said, of course not. He says, this is simply something I do to express my love of God. And there's a lot to that, because if you're looking at halakha as a roadmap and as a guideline, the more you learn, the better you are. But in my humble, ignorant view, my buddy doesn't care. So it's a tough walk as between how it all fits together. And that gets to the classes that the rabbi had, because, you know, it's a question of where do you get your answers? Do you get them from halakha, or do you get them from your sense as, I can't describe this part, your sense as a Jew as to right and wrong? So, sorry to take so long.
Hey, yes, your cough. Anybody else want to chime in? Marcia, yeah.
Yeah, I'll try. I didn't write anything as I was wrestling with several things. Our very first class, the exercise we had led to something in my head. Do I really believe in God? And at that point, I wasn't sure. And I'm still, you know, for me, I believe there, just say, you know, God such as, to me, there's a force that sets things in motion in our universe and arrange things that, you know, that they work. I feel in that sense there is a God or a superior being in a way. And to the issue of the Torah, again, history, and every group has its foundation myths or its creation myths. And I look at it, it's a history of our people. It was written by man, influenced by the experience of this group of people, our forebears, which I am very proud of, and I'm very proud to be a Jew. And it created a way to live, the way people live in a society. And the more I learned about it, and in this class, with looking at the basics and the conservative approach, I'm very comfortable with being a conservative Jew. I'm proud to be that. It makes me very comfortable in myself. I believe in the principles of Judaism. I love the flexibility of conservative Judaism. Overall, as I've learned more and read more, not only the Torah, but other books of the Bible and more history, it's an amazing story of survival and how adaptable we are. And it's come through to me. And as I said, I'm very comfortable with what I am, and I have learned so much in this class. And Rabbi, again, thank you very much for your time and your wisdom.
First of all, thank you to everybody. I mean, whether you spoke tonight or not, and whether you were here for all of the classes or most of the classes or only some of the classes, I want to thank you for your participation. I mean, I think this is tough stuff. And it is also, I mean, I don't mean this in a way of like patting myself on the back, but it is stuff that many rabbis will shy away from, because it does challenge the foundations of belief, and it does challenge people's perception of what the rabbi should believe, does believe, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, in my experience, when it comes to theology, okay, specifically, I mean theology in the sort of pure sense, okay, that is to say, beliefs about God and beliefs about revelation. I think most conservative rabbis are more liberal than most of their congregants. And I think the reason for that is simply that we have thought these things through more and we have studied them more. And that is, in a certain sense, the tragedy of the education that we get. And even though my rabbinical training was not in the framework of the conservative movement, I don't think that there's significantly different the training that I got in, let's say, theology and theories of revelation is no different than I would have gotten at JTS. You know, what I would have learned at JTS more is halachic texts, but I mean, in that sense, I'm kind of an autodidact, and when I first switched from Reform to conservative, I was very insecure about my learning level. And I would say that 27 years in the conservative rabbinate has left me much less insecure about that. I no longer feel inferior to the average JTS trained conservative rabbi. I certainly feel inferior to, you know, rabbis like Rabbi Heller, who wrote the responsum on Zoom, or you know, Rabbi Dorf, who's the head of the law committee, or Rabbi Barmash, who's now the co-head of the law committee. But you know, but having said that, you know, so the training that we receive can lead, I think, to a kind of bifurcated soul. And I admit to that. In other words, you know, sometimes, and I don't recall whether I have said this to any of you, but sometimes when people come to me with a question, I will say, are you asking me as a rabbi, or are you asking me as a university trained historian of religion? Right? Because I will give you different answers, right? And it all depends on context. In other words, if I am standing on Yom Kippur in front of the Ark saying, you know, Avinu Malkeinu, keep far from us pestilence, war, and famine. Avinu Malkeinu, inscribe us for blessing in the book of life. Avinu Malkeinu, cause the government of arrogance to vanish from the earth. I felt that more seriously the last 2-3 years than before. But I absolutely believe that be'emuna shlema, right, with full heart, right, that I am imploring God for life, for blessing, and that the next year is determined by what God decides at that moment. That is what I believe then. Okay, it is not what I believe when I'm teaching a theology class, right? It is not what I believe if I were to be writing a journal article, right? And it's tough sometimes. I mean, when I, for example, when I was down at the border in December of 2018, right? And my Spanish is not great, but it's good enough, and talking to people who had literally walked 2,000 miles across the desert to the border with everything they own in a backpack, carrying a 3-year-old child, right? And they said, I got here because God protected me, and I know that God is going to get me into the United States. And my intellectual brain said, no, he ain't. But I wished that I had that simple faith, right? That there is something beautiful and pure and innocent about that simple faith, and also that simple faith would tell them when they didn't get in, okay, that God is still with them, and that God will still protect them, and that in some other way it will work out, okay? And I wish that I could have that kind of simple faith, but my training doesn't allow it, right? And it's not just the training I received in rabbinical school. It's frankly the training that I received in philosophy and theology as an undergraduate at a Catholic college, right? I mean, when you have pundits of the religious right, whether they be Christian or Orthodox Jewish, say universities destroy faith, they're not wrong. They're actually not wrong. But that kind of faith, I think, is incompatible. I mean, I'll say this, okay? So one of our newer congregants who's not that involved in the shul, but she asked on Facebook every day question of the day, okay? And the question of the day a couple of days ago was, what is one thing you find impossible to believe? And I decided to answer her question of the day. I said, I find it impossible to believe that the God who gave us an intellect doesn't want us to use it. And that to me, if I had to sum up my theological approach, I think that in one sentence, that might well be it. I mean, I could say other things too, but if I had to come up with a bumper sticker, that might be it. In fact, that to me, that's at least one of the possible bumper stickers for the conservative movement. God gave us an intellect and wants us to use it. So anyway, I've said enough.
Oh,
Anybody else, or questions or discussion or issues of concern or things that are unclear that I can make more unclear?
I'm looking at Toby's furrowed brow and wondering what she's thinking.
Yeah, there we go. There, what struck me was that same lightning bolt that hit Mike Goldman's house. But what strikes me is the similarities, where the circles overlap between where all of us spoke. And I really thought that when I submitted my statement to you, you were going to trade my rights to the Unitarian Church at some point. But we are in many ways in the same general area. And one of the most valuable things that happened to me in this class was very early on, Marcia did make a statement. We were still in the building at the time, that she had questions about the existence of, or really about the existence of the supreme being. Didn't say she didn't believe, but said that she had questions. And Marsha's a very bright person. I thought, uh-oh, I better really think this thing through. But that's really been the advantage of this class, that we've had to think about and come out of our own little shells a little bit. There are certain things that you do as you go along in life because of your experiences, that when you go to a synagogue, when you meet with learned people, it resonates. I don't believe every year when I go to the synagogue and hear the cantor do Hineni, you cannot be a trial lawyer and not understand that completely. You have been there. You have talked to a judge or a jury or a fact finder, and you want to say, look, I know I'm not perfect. I know my shoes aren't shined, and I know that I'm going to use the wrong words. But please don't hold that against my client. My client deserves somebody who speaks clearly and beautifully. And we all have those parallels that come to us and that help us. And that's why to work through that, it was very hard to write this because, first off, you don't know how much of yourself to put in there. And secondly, these are huge concepts, and any one of them could have been quite a long paper. And I would certainly hope that we have the opportunity to do this again in the fall, be it on Zoom or in the building or however we're going to do it, because I really believe this is a very valuable opportunity that the synagogue allows us.
Great. Well, let me say this, is that I want to teach at least as much as you want to study, if not more. So I am happy to continue this class. I would need guidance as to how we would do that. In other words, whether we want to try and generate topics that we haven't covered, whether we want to go back and relook at some of the topics that we have covered, whether you all want me to maybe find some relatively bite-sized essays that we read together and then critique them. I'm open to all those formats, but in all seriousness, I'd say, if we're going to continue this class in the fall, I need your help in terms of figuring out where we go. And I'd love to do it. I'd be more than delighted to do it. And I can give you the coffee cake that I made.
Well, that's what we want to have.
Right.
We're faced with a real problem coming up for the high holidays. The problem is that the responsum that allowed us to consider the Zoom service kosher and a minyan kosher has an exception written in there having to do with reading the Torah. And you know, when we read the Torah on Saturday morning, we don't read the Torah on Saturday morning in Zoom. We have a special prayer we say, which is for the study of Torah. And then we read from a Chumash, which you'll have to take my word for it. It is incredibly easy to do that.
Definitely.
Reading the Torah from the scroll. But for halachic reasons, the guy who wrote that responsum drew a line. And he said, well, you know, I can work around, in effect, he said, I mean, he didn't put it this way. In effect, he said, I could work around everything that conservative Jews need to have Shabbos services on Zoom and feel like they're accomplishing something. The only thing I can't work around is Torah. And I think it would be a fascinating thing to explore, because to me, I mean, it's obvious because this is what I'm interested in, but to me, the question of how much of our religious practice are we capable of and interested in molding, and how much of our religious practice do we accept is decided already if only we knew enough. The rabbi knows enough. So, and he made a life decision to go with halacha rather than be a reformed rabbi. I mean, it's a huge question, and it was to him, it was a life-changing question to him. All the more reason that it would be fascinating to explore, because we need, what we need at the moment is the ability to continue the practice and the feeling of closeness to our religion that the Zoom services give us.
Right.
And it's really important. And that gap, to me, is real easy to solve because we solve it every Saturday. But it's not the halakhically kosher solution. And that becomes a great example of a push that came to shove and how we deal with that in real life.
Well, I mean, look, I have to say that, you know, I'm trying to find out how to say this. Okay, so you're going to think this is from out of left field, but one of the great myths of Jewish life, okay, upon which, for example, was based a great episode of Larry David's show Curb Your Enthusiasm, is the myth that if you have a tattoo, you cannot be buried in a Jewish cemetery, right? It is something that is widely believed that is simply not the case. Having said that, I'm not aware about tattoos per se, right? But there was at one point in Europe a fashion to not circumcise your sons, okay? Because people wanted to fit in society, right? Now, there is nothing in halakha that says that an uncircumcised Jew can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery. But many communities passed precisely such a regulation as a way of essentially strong-arming people into having their kids circumcised. It was a public policy decision rather than a halachic one. And Rabbi Heller, I mean, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he essentially said, we as the law committee were not willing to go that far as to allow a regular Torah reading on Zoom because we wanted to preserve something as an incentive for people to go back to shul when it's safe to do so. And to me, it's kind of like, you know, there's a tradition that when a Jew builds a house, they're supposed to leave a little bit unfinished, right? As a zecher lechorban, as a reminder of the destruction of the temple, right? And when we, you know, so at a wedding, we break a glass as a reminder of the destruction of the temple. And I think there is actually, and I'm willing to be convinced otherwise, right? But I think there's a certain value in having some aspect of our Zoom service as a kind of zecher l'chorban. right? That we remember the tragedy in the midst of which we are living, and we want to hold out something as an incentive for people to get back to shul. Having said that, I mean, there are a million buts, okay? And I acknowledge them. I mean, the first but is when the law committee dealt with this in March, nobody imagined that by September, many Jews would still feel that it was not safe to go back to shul, right? I mean, maybe some of you did, but certainly I didn't. Okay, so that's the first but. The second but is that it's not unreasonable to think that by Rosh Hashanah we might legitimately, with minimal risk, have at least a minyan in the shul, while the overwhelming majority participate on Zoom. And we have to figure out a way for the people who are in the shul to see the people who are on Zoom, because I would still be more than happy to have somebody laying on Zoom from their house, or have an aliyah on Zoom from their house, even if there's a minyan in the shul and we're actually reading from the Sefer Torah. The third possibility, okay, and this may surprise you, given the intensity of my reaction to the suggestion that we have parts or all even of the service pre-recorded, is that if we are still doing our Torah reading under the rubric of Torah study rather than public statutory worship, there's actually no reason why we couldn't pre-record it, and why people couldn't come individually into the shul to read their aliyah from the Torah scroll, videotape it, and then splice that together. In the same way that, I mean, Barnaby hasn't actually done it, but I said that he couldn't lead a service for us because he's in a totally different time zone, but he could still read for us because there's no time definition or restriction on Torah study, right? So if you can watch, right, I mean, if I can videotape these classes and you can watch them later and that's still Torah study, right? Assuming that watching my classes counts as Torah study, okay? And we'll assume that for the sake of this discussion, right? It's still Torah study if you watch it on tape. So why wouldn't watching Marcia or Lori or Charlotte chant from the Torah on tape be valid? I think it could be. Whereas, and it's unfortunate because what we really want is a way for Hazan Comrade to do the Amida on tape.
Right.
And this is where you talk about rubber gets the road. As I said to you in an email, the few times you've ever seen me really get my back up over something is when I am being asked to permit something that it is clear to me is contrary to halacha. And that it's clear to me that that is contrary to halacha. But doing the Torah reading on video, as long as we're still operating in the rubric of Torah study, I don't see any reason why we couldn't do that. So I'm not advocating it. I'm just throwing it out there as as a possibility, as a, something that kind of occurred to me in a discussion with a Reform colleague today who said, well, why don't you just pre-record everything? And I said, because we're conservative, we can't do that. But having said that, I don't see why we couldn't pre-record the Torah and the Haftarah, as long as we're operating under the rubric of Torah study.
Rabbi, I'm sorry for not having been a participant in the class, but in entering into this thought process, when I was much younger, one of my many uncles, my favorite uncle, was tragically struck with a very horrible kind of cancer. This would have been in very, very early 1970s, when my entire family were members of B'nai Israel, and there was a significant number of people in B'nai Israel who were Orthodox, even though B'nai Israel is a conservative synagogue. While he was in the process, literally, of dying, his son was supposed to be bar mitzvahed. And the rabbi told the family that that could not be postponed. And it was just about the time when video taping or recording came into its own. And so the family asked, literally as a dying request, could the bar mitzvah ceremony in a synagogue be taped for him to be able to see from his hospital bed? And this would have been one of the very first bar mitzvahs in a long line of cousins. My uncle didn't live more than a few days after the day of bar mitzvah. And the rabbi flat out, unequivocally said no. And the cantor echoed that. And we were all heartbroken. And especially as a young person, I had absolutely no respect for that decision. And that stayed with me for a very long time, because there were very few things that my uncle or that family had asked for. And that still stays with my cousin today, who has walked away from Judaism because of this. My point is, when I never really left the synagogue, and I never really left the faith, but when my family left, when my father died and we left B'nai Israel, I didn't go to services very often. When I first met you, I said, Rabbi, I understand, I can read, I don't know Hebrew very well, and I can't keep up with services, but I want to come back and I want to learn. And your words to this day echo in my head. And they said, and you said, I don't remember if you said God specifically, but you said to me, whatever is in your heart is what matters. And if it takes you to read the service in English, don't worry one bit about keeping up with what's being said in Hebrew. Don't even worry if you're not on the same page. And that stuck with me till today. And that didn't cause me for one single second to stop trying to go back to tradition and to be more engaged and I forget the word that I'm trying to use, but I'm trying to tie this to your point about what was proposed as a way of a carrot or an impetus to make people not forget what they were really responsible for, to return to the traditional when God willing this is over. Well, none of what you said to me, not only did it not lessen my desire to be more traditional, it encouraged me to strive to go to a higher or a better level. So I'm not really sure, you're going to laugh at me now, I'm not really sure what I'm trying to say, but I'm trying to say it from my heart. And I think that fundamental in Judaism is to make for allowances. This is not obviously the Orthodox point of view, except where health is concerned, but to make reasonable accommodations that will keep people engaged and remove excuses and reasons for going further away. So I'm not necessarily advocating filming services or anything like that, but I am saying that I have a tremendous amount of respect and appreciation for the courage and the independent thought that you have exercised, even at risk with what your collegial group and mandates were. And I would hope that you would continue that reasonable flexibility even through the high holidays without throwing away what is essential and important. Sorry for the filibuster, but I just feel that very deeply.
Right. I mean, the problem is that what one person considers reasonable flexibility, another person considers to be unpardonable heresy.
Right.
And I mean, so Mike before mentioned the concept of roadmap, right? And so when I was discussing the Zoom question and the Zoom responsum with Rabbi Heller, and I said to him, look, we've just been doing Zoom law committee decision or no law committee decision. Because what was originally proposed, we just couldn't do, right? And then I read his responsum and I had some comments, and actually some of them he accepted, and I think the final draft that was passed was like draft 32, and I saw some of my suggestions. I mean, not that he was quoted, not that he attributed them to me, not that he needed to, but some of my suggestions were incorporated in there. And even so, I said, I still think your responsum is too strict, but we can pretty much live with it. And I will live with it to the extent that we can. And he said, that's great, because what I wanted to provide was not prescriptions so much as a roadmap for each rabbi within his or her own context, both in terms of the orientation of the congregation and the finances of the congregation and all of that, to have a roadmap as to how to make that decision. And similarly, with the guidance that we received on the high holidays, right, where essentially what they did was they stripped the service down to its bare essentials, right, and said, halachically, here is the bare minimum that you must do, right? Not saying this is the prescription, right? But what I'm going to try to do over the next 2-3 weeks is try and get a sense of what parts of the high holiday service are like really beloved to a lot of people.
Right.
Right. And then or conversely, what parts of the service people say, I don't get this, I don't need it, I don't understand it, it wouldn't kill me if it was skipped, right? But then, what we can't do is, leave out parts of the service that are halachically required to make room for things that are not required but are beloved, right? But if there are two, I'll call them optional, two different optional parts of the liturgy, and one is beloved and one people are indifferent to, then we include the beloved one and we leave out the indifferent one, right? So it's a roadmap, but that roadmap is a useful tool. I mean, the paper also gave a few for instances of things that, and I really didn't even look at that because everybody's context is different. But the sort of the stripped down bare essentials, these are the things that you must include as a bare minimum, I think is a useful tool as we figure out how to move forward. And the thing is, look, we're gonna get it wrong. I mean, we're just gonna get it wrong, okay? Which contradicts something that I said in a sermon a few years ago, where I was quoting Chancellor Eisen, where he said that the role of ritual is to give us something that we can get right. And this year we can't even do that. I mean, we're gonna get it wrong because as small as we are, we're still 100, 110, 120 individuals,
Right.
you know, who each has their own likes and dislikes and preferences and so on and so forth. But you know, in a way, I would think I'd just be better off acknowledging that in the same way that, you know, when I was a Hillel director, right? And I will tell you that, you know, the first time I went to services as not a kid, let's say as a teenager at a synagogue other than my own, I was like, they're doing this all wrong, right? Because right, the way they do it in your shul is the right way, right? And then I'm coming to American University, and I have sitting in front of me people who grew up in 500 different shuls, right? So I just started the service by saying, I'm going to do it wrong. Okay, I am going to do it wrong. Okay, now that I've admitted that I'm going to do it wrong, sit back and enjoy the ride.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And we're, you know, we're not going to get it 100% right, but hopefully, you know, hopefully we can at least have an approximation of getting it right without killing anybody. Because the without killing anybody is not a minor concern.
And Rabbi, you also have the constraint of time because of the use of Zoom. You know, people wouldn't be able to sit through a 4-hour or 5-hour Zoom.
Right. Although Joe Lustig came up with what I think is a very good idea for the daytime services is to, and even if we do this, we're still going to have to cut because our daytime services on Rosh Hashanah are like 5 hours, and on Yom Kippur they're like 6.5 hours. But he said instead of doing a 4-hour block, do 2 2-hour blocks. In other words, sit, you know, just, you know, as a rough approximation, from 10 to noon, right, we do everything through the Torah service. And then we take a break. And then from 2 to 4, we do, let's say, my sermon and Musaf.
That's no different than what most shuls use as a model for Yom Kippur. When I was a kid, they just stayed all the way through, and there was
right. But this is not staying all the way through. This is
I
saying,
know that. I know that.
This is saying that there are 2-hour blocks.
Right.
And therefore, you know, and it's perfectly fine because Musaf does not have to be done right after the sermon. Musaf can be done at any time during the day, or certainly at least at any time prior to Mincha. So that's one idea that we're playing with. I mean, hopefully people will find it easier to go 10 to 2 and 2 to 4. I mean, 10 to noon and 2 to 4 on Zoom rather than going from 10 to 2 on Zoom.
Rabbi, that's absolutely correct. The problem is there are these other traditions and Rosh Hashanah. Well, I mean, I don't know how locked down we're going to be at that point. None of us know, of course. But if people have in their mind that, well, I'm going to go to this, that, or the other thing in the afternoon to visit with people or any of that, I don't really want them to miss the sermon. I don't want to front load it either so that you have all the good stuff in the morning. Right. And then people say, yeah, it's no problem at all missing in the afternoon. But I think we need to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's just a roadmap.
You know, I understand.
And out of what you said, the only thing that's really a built-in conflict is what's halachically required and what's loved. So when the two bump, then you've got a bump. But there's a third give in the equation, which is time. And
Mike, you're not coming over.
Yeah. God didn't like what he was about to say.
you start
Lightning.
I mean,
Mike, you're frozen.
least think it through is to start out saying, okay, this is what does it take to make all that happen, and see how much of a problem you have before you start slicing and
He really didn't like what he
I used to come up with the ritual committee, and that's where it'll really be hashed out. You're all welcome to come to the ritual committee. Marcia, you do anyway.
Right.
And
No, but I also think, you know, there's a great phrase that's usually used in politics, specifically left of center politics, okay? The narcissism of small differences, right? And this year we cannot afford the
Agree with that.
narcissism of small differences.
That's correct.
We just can't, you know, and unfortunately, I'm going to say this. In that regard, you know, I think it's better than it probably was 10 years ago, but we still have a certain toxicity of culture where people, if I don't get my way, I'm quitting the shul.
Mhm.
Right.
And we can't be blackmailed by that. I mean, you know, we just can't. I mean, hopefully people won't play that game.
over this sort of thing.
Over anything, the way it is now, it goes over anything. I'm gonna take my football and I'm going home.
Yeah. You know, look, and there's nothing that you can do because it's a voluntary association. But you know, in my previous shul, we had a discussion about a different model of Hebrew school. Sound familiar? And there was one family that said, if you do this, we are quitting. Okay. And at the time I was actually working in a mentorship program through JTS. And I threw that to my mentor and he said, let them quit.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's always sad to lose members, but you can't let one or two loud and insistent people blackmail you, because that's what it is. It's blackmail.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Rabbi, is there any concern after this is all over that this is so convenient and we have shorter services and that we're going to have problems when it's,
look,
I mean, I wouldn't want to be Zoom forever. I'd probably quit.
Right. No, look, I mean, these are things that we'll have to figure out. Okay. And here are my two desiderata. Okay. Desiderata number one, I do not want Zoom to replace the synagogue as the locus of our service.
That's what I worry sometimes.
Desiderata number two, I do not want all of those people who were unable to participate before because of age, illness, health issues, distance from the shul, to be unable to participate, right? I don't, in other words, so as I envision it, eventually it's probably the service taking place in the shul and simply live streamed,
Right.
as opposed to Zoom, right? In other words, you know, if you're not there, you'll be able to see and hear. But, you know, when I give my sermon, you'll be able to hear my sermon, you'll be able to hear Dee's question, and Mike's objection, but you won't be able to question or object because it'll be a one-way stream. Probably, but I mean, let's get there and then we'll figure it out. But it's not too early to think about these things.
You gotta cut yourself some slack in the thinking, though, because you're looking at the size of our attendance today on a Saturday morning or on a weekday night, and you're saying, well, it's double what it would have been if we were in shul, so we must be doing something right. You got to remember, cut yourself some slack because you're talking to a captive audience.
Right? No, I get that.
It's not like people have other choices at the moment.
I understand that, and weekday minyan. As far as I'm concerned, weekday minyan is a completely different issue than Shabbos services. I would be personally, not for quotation, although this is going to be up on YouTube tomorrow morning, unless anybody objects, right? I mean, everybody's comfortable. It's usually 10 people watch it, so it's not like that big a deal. But I probably am comfortable with evening minyan continuing on Zoom indefinitely, because I do think actually that the end of the pandemic, people are gonna ask themselves the question, why am I driving 25 minutes in each direction for a 15-minute service?
I can tell you right now that this whole deal is going to be with us for probably 14 to 18 months. So
It's at
a
least
lot of
what I
time.
agree.
Yeah, this is not going to get better for any kind of sustainable way until not only is there a real and viable vaccine, but until the distribution and also the people who are opposed to getting vaccinated can be bought into this. So we don't have time to put off thinking about these things, but we shouldn't be thinking in terms of, well, by October, the weather will change and this will go. It's very much different now. Having said that, it's a perfect time for me to say, thank you very much for letting me sit in. Now that I've been zinged and you've had your zinger, I'm going to leave the meeting. I hope everybody's well and see you at the next service.
All right, I think we can wind down. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Rabbi.
Take care.
Good
Thank
night.
you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Night.
Good night.
Night.